Good morning. Good morning, everyone, and it's good to see you all here today as we wind down this year. Well, recently we completed a series of explorations into the Heart Sutra, discussing prajna paramita, wisdom beyond wisdom, and shunyata, emptiness. It may have been a little abstract at times. So I would like to get back to talking about Zazen and everyday life. In particular, the attitude one takes toward Zazen, how one approaches it. In the past week, I've been reading a book, rereading actually. I've read it a couple times before by um, Kosho Uchiyama, Approach to Zen. He's written a number of books. He's a 20th century Zen teacher who died in 1998. Born in 1912, and he didn't become a Zen monk until he was 29 years of age. Interestingly, the same age that the Buddha left the palace, according to the story. But Uchiyama before becoming a Zen monk, he studied at college and had two unfortunate marriages. He studied Western philosophy at college and then taught in a Catholic school before joining the priesthood. But his marriages prior to him becoming a monk, the first ended when his wife contracted tuberculosis and died, which was not unusual at that time in Japan. And the second, tragically, his wife died bearing their first child, and the child died as well. The baby died as well. And meanwhile, Japan had entered into war, and his father recommended that he become a monk along with and to study with Kodo Sawaki, a well-known monk or priest at that time and a teacher, which he did. Kodo Sawaki moved Uchiyama around the country to various temples, in part to sort of evade the draft. But during the war and the post-war period, of course, were extremely hard in Japan, and Uchiyama lived through that. He wrote numerous books. Many of his books are very similar to the other books that he wrote. They all have their own character. But his message, I think, is fairly consistent. The book that I reread was the one that preceded his most popular book, which is Opening the Hand of Thought. So anyway, with that fresh reading in mind, I thought I would talk a little bit about the attitude toward Zazen and the attitude toward everyday life. So, Zazen, sitting still, upright, letting go of thoughts. So the posture is important, and not everyone, of course, has perfect posture. In fact, most people don't. I certainly don't. But paying attention to the body and how it's positioned is an important part of Zazen, an important part of sitting meditation practice. Because that posture of being upright is associated with mental calmness and alertness. You know, newborns have various states. One obvious state is when they're crying and carrying on, but they also have a state that's called the quiet alert state, where they're just their eyes, they're still, their eyes may be moving around, looking at what's around them. And they're very alert. They're noticing, they're paying attention. And in a way, Zazen is recreating that condition, that quiet, alert state of the newborn that precedes language and concepts. Language and concepts are not yet acquired at that time. And we're trying to, during Zazen, see beyond language and concepts. So it's important to not think about that in terms of trying to suppress or get rid of language and concepts, just not be caught up in them. So we talk about letting go of thoughts or letting thoughts be, not grasping. And Uchiyama uses the term opening the hand of thought. With the open hand, we can't grasp, so that the thoughts just fly off as they will. They alight and they fly off like birds at a bird feeder. Another important point is that, well, most succinctly put by Uchiyama's teacher, Kodo Sawaki, Zazen is good for nothing. In other words, as Uchiyama puts it, you do Zazen for the sake of Zazen. So it is not a self-improvement project. Self-improvement often involves a view of the self as something separate from the other, as something distinct, as something that needs to be fixed. And viewing Zazen in that way, as a self-improvement project with a goal of fixing the self, poisons the punch and it spoils the party. So that notion of a goal is treated like any other thought during Zazen, as something to be let go of, as something to allow to fly away. So this attitude toward Zazen, if, for instance, Zazen is practiced in the morning, as many people do, can be taken throughout the day. Now, clearly, one cannot sit still all day long. There are things for most of us to do, although oftentimes many of those things are self-imposed, but nonetheless, we do move through the day and do things and interact with other people. But the kind of awareness of body and mind which characterizes Zazen can be revisited throughout the day. And as much as possible, maintained. There's a quote that is so typical of Uchiyama that I'll share with you. It goes like this. To live out the life of the self, capital S, doesn't mean the self-intoxication of I alone. Rather, this attitude toward life is to discover life which is pervading throughout all things within the self, capital S. It is to live aiming at the manifestation of life in each and everything we meet, and to see everything we meet as an extension of our own life. This attitude towards life is called compassion. So, in this short quote, it encapsulates a number of ideas that Uchiyama stresses again and again. When he talks about the self-intoxication of I, he's talking about the what we might call small self, small letter self, that which views itself as separate in a world of self and other, which has the notions of possessiveness about it. My body, my possessions, me and mine, which is transactional in the sense of, I'll give you this if you'll give me that, and competitive, constantly comparing, making comparisons between self and other, often involved in some sort of conquest, some sort of quest to obtain something in what is perceived as a zero-sum game. My gain is your loss, my loss is your gain. That's the kind of thing that is referred to here as the self-intoxication of I alone. And rather, this attitude toward life, approach to life, how one approaches Zazen and how one approaches the day are with some sort of attitude. And that attitude is very important, and it is something to be aware of. Lots of times we're perhaps not even aware of what attitude with which we approach the day or with which we approach Zazen. But an attitude toward life is to discover, I think Zazen is a process of discovery, of observation, of learning by perceiving, by looking, by paying attention, by becoming aware. And everyday life is like that as well, or it can be a project in becoming aware, seeing, observing, seeing how things work. To discover life which is pervading throughout all things within the self. Uchiyama has a notion of the large capital S self as being essentially everything, the universe. And we all function within this self. And there is life pervading all of it. To become aware of this life that pervades everything. It is to live aiming at everything we meet as an extension of our own life, not separate. And this attitude toward life is called compassion. I don't know, I've read a number of Uchiyama's books, and I've reread them. And um, sometimes I think I understand, and other times I think I don't. But on this reading, I had an image, or I guess an analogy that came to mind of every day as being like an improv theater performance. You wake up and there's a new set, a new bunch of props, new costumes, and new players. And you enter in the theater and make it up, make up a performance with everyone else. And improvisation, as anyone who does this will tell you, involves mostly listening and paying attention to what the other characters are doing, and moving and acting and speaking in such a way as to enhance the performance, to enhance the performance of everyone else, for the benefit of the whole theater, including the audience. So that everyone benefits when all of the players are viewing their role in that way. And there is a spontaneity about it. When it works, it's just there's a beautiful grace about it. Every day, as improv theater, aiming toward seeing the life pervading all of it for the benefit of everyone in the room. So, in this analogy, you play your part, whatever it might be, and it's going to change from day to day and from set to set, and depending on what props are available and what other players are present. There's a reading from later in the book about flowers. I think it's important that Uchiyama studied Western philosophy when he was at the university in Japan. So he has that kind of sensitivity and knowledge about Western traditions. And then he went to teach in a Catholic school for a while and learned about that tradition. And he weaves that into his Zen teachings. In this passage, he says, it's about flowers. The lily blooming in the field, why on earth does it bloom? It blooms solely because it has been given life. Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They toil not, neither do they spin. And yet I say unto you that even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. Quoting a passage, of course, from Matthew. Here, the glory of life simply appears. In the same way, the violet blooms as a violet, and the rose expresses its life as a rose. The flowers blooming in the field do not feel with pride that they would win first prize in a beauty contest. They do not feel that they are in competition with other flowers. The violet does not develop an inferiority complex, thinking the roses are big and beautiful, but a little violet like myself is useless. It doesn't say with greed and impatience, I must become more efficient. It simply manifests its own life force with all of its might, manifests its own life force with all of its might. So those are just some reflections today on an approach to Zazen and to everyday life. And I think I'll stop there so as not to go on too long. But I wonder if there are ways that you had found of not getting tangled up in blue, as Bob Dylan would state it, during the course of the day, of not getting confused and staying aware of the big picture, the boundless universe in which life is pervaded throughout. So I'll leave you with that, and we'll go into breakout rooms, and we'll be back in a few minutes. Thank you very much for listening today, and see you shortly.